You stand in front of an open fridge right now, or you scroll a delivery app, and you make a decision in about 4 seconds without even noticing you're making it. Chicken, yes. That mushroom growing in the backyard, no. You don't test it. You don't smell it for 10 minutes first. You just know, and you've never once wondered why you know, because the knowing feels like it was always there, built in, free. It wasn't free. Somebody paid for that knowledge with their life. And not just somebody, thousands of somebodies, generation after generation, in a slow and largely invisible transaction that never once showed up in any history book. The instinct sitting quietly in your brain right now, the one that flinches at the smell of spoiled meat or hesitates at a strange berry, is a scar tissue. It's the residue of a body count we've never actually calculated. Here's the number that should unsettle you a little. Modern humans and the hominins before us have been eating wild, untested plants for something like 2 to 3 million years before agriculture gave us a stable, known menu around 10,000 years ago. That's not a stretch of time. That's an ocean. Every single edible plant your ancestors identified as safe had to be discovered by someone who did not know it was safe until after they'd already swallowed it. There was no label, no poison control hotline, no older cousin to ask. Just a mouth, a gut, and consequences that could take minutes or days to arrive. And this is where the question gets its teeth. If the only way to find out a plant is toxic is to eat it and see what happens, how did any group survive long enough to build a reliable list at all? How do you build a survival manual when writing a single entry might kill the author? That's the puzzle sitting underneath every trail mix, bar, and salad you've ever casually eaten without a second thought. The answer isn't one clever trick. It's a stack of at least 4 overlapping survival systems, layered on top of each other over deep time, each one covering for the blind spots of the others. Strip away any one of them, and the whole approach collapses. Understanding all 4 is really understanding why you're alive to read this at all. Start with the crudest filter humans had, and it's still running in your mouth this second. Bitterness. Most of the deadliest plant toxins, things like alkaloids and cyanogenic compounds, taste intensely bitter to the human tongue, and human bitterness receptors are almost absurdly sensitive, tuned by evolution to detect these compounds at concentrations far too low to do any real damage. A toddler today will spit out a bitter vegetable on pure reflex before anyone teaches them a single word about nutrition. That's not pickiness. That's a 2-million-year-old alarm system firing on schedule. But here's the crack in that armor. Bitterness only warns you about toxins you can taste. It says nothing about a slow-acting poison with no flavor signature at all, and some of the most lethal plant compounds on Earth are nearly tasteless. The tongue can only catch what it's built to catch. So there had to be a second layer, and this one is uncomfortable to sit with: small dose sampling. Anthropological and ethnobotanical research on foraging societies suggests that unfamiliar plants were rarely eaten in a full portion first. A tiny amount, a nibble, sometimes just a taste held on the tongue and spat out, then a wait, sometimes hours, sometimes a full day, watching for nausea, dizziness, numbness of the lips, anything wrong. This wasn't caution for its own sake. It was math. A small dose of a lethal plant might make you sick. A full meal of the same plant might make you dead. The people running this test again and again across a lifetime were absorbing a slow accumulation of low-level poisoning, stomach damage, organ stress, chronic illness that never shows up in the fossil record as died from testing food, but very likely shortened lives in ways we can't fully measure anymore. And that's the part that should sit heavy with you for a second. We don't have a body count. We can't. There's no memorial for the people who slowly ruined their livers figuring out that a particular root needed to be soaked for 2 days before it was safe. Their names aren't anywhere. Their contribution survives only as an instinct in you, an unspoken, don't eat that, passed mouth to mouth to mouth until it became your grandmother's rule, and then just your rule, and now you don't even know it's a rule at all. But individual sampling alone still isn't enough to explain how entire populations avoided wiping themselves out, and this is where the story gets stranger than most people expect. The real engine of plant knowledge wasn't the brave individual tester. It was watching animals. Foraging groups paid close attention to what other creatures around them were eating, and, just as critically, what they were avoiding. If birds stripped a berry bush bare every autumn and never touched a different one nearby, that was data. If an animal known to eat almost anything still walked past a certain plant, that mattered more than 100 human guesses. This is called the sentinel strategy in some ethnobotanical research. using other species as a testing panel, and it's brutally efficient because it outsources the risk to creatures who'd already run the experiment on themselves, sometimes over their own evolutionary timescales. Except animals aren't a perfect map either, because some animals can safely eat plants that are lethal to humans. Certain birds eat berries whose seeds contain compounds that would stop a human heart. So watching wildlife gave you a head start, not a guarantee, and groups who trusted it blindly paid for that trust. Which forces us to the layer that actually made this whole system survivable across generations. And it has nothing to do with biology at all. It's storytelling, in the most literal sense. Verbal transmission. A hard-won lesson: this root will kill you unless you boil it 3 times. This leaf looks almost identical to a safe one, but has a slightly darker vein, only becomes permanently useful if it can be repeated accurately by someone who never personally suffered for it. Anthropologists studying oral cultures have long noted how frequently plant knowledge gets wrapped into story, warning, taboo, even ritual and myth, because a story sticks in memory in a way a flat instruction doesn't. A rule wrapped in fear and consequence, told around a fire, survives copying error after copying error far better than a dry fact does. In a very real sense, myths about cursed plants and forbidden fruit weren't superstition getting in the way of practical knowledge. They were the technology that carried practical knowledge forward before anyone could write it down. Now here's the twist that most people never connect to their own daily lives, and it's been sitting under this entire explanation the whole time. Some researchers argue that the human sense of disgust itself, that specific full-body recoil at the thought of eating something spoiled or wrong, evolved directly out of this plant testing pressure, as a faster, cheaper alternative to actually getting sick. Disgust doesn't wait for the bitterness to hit your tongue or the nausea to hit your stomach. It fires the instant something looks off, smells off, seems contaminated, and it makes you recoil before any toxin ever enters your body. That reflex you feel when you see mold on bread, or the mild revulsion at food left out too long, isn't really about the bread. It's a hand-me-down defense mechanism, refined across an almost incomprehensible number of trial and error deaths, now firing in your kitchen for free. Which brings us to the piece almost nobody expects, the detail that flips the whole story on its head. The most dangerous plants humans ever learned to eat weren't the ones our ancestors avoided. They were the ones they didn't avoid. The ones that were toxic raw but became a reliable food source anyway, because someone figured out the fix. Cassava, a root eaten by hundreds of millions of people today across Africa, South America, and Asia, contains cyanogenic compounds in its raw form that can be lethal. It became a staple food, not because it was safe, but because generations of people worked out an elaborate multi-step process of peeling, soaking, fermenting, and cooking that neutralizes the toxin almost completely. Get the process wrong, skip a step under pressure or famine, and people still get sick from it today, in the modern world, with all our chemistry. The knowledge isn't ancient trivia. It's an active, living inheritance still being used at dinner tables right now, on the same razor's edge it always was. So when you open that fridge tonight, or order dinner without a second thought, you're not just satisfying hunger. You're spending an inheritance that cost an uncountable number of lives to build, paid in small doses of poison and slow illness and the occasional death that never made it into any record, refined across bitterness receptors, borrowed animal behavior, disgust reflexes, and stories told at fires to children who would never know why the story mattered so much. Nobody wrote their names down. There was no ceremony for the ones who got it wrong. But every time your stomach turns at the smell of something gone bad, that's them, still working, still trying to keep you alive, all these thousands of generations later.